4468 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 4468, a bill to prohibit the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency from finalizing, implementing, or enforcing a proposed rule with respect to emissions from vehicles and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Is there any discussion on the bill? The chair recognizes Mr. Pfluger from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to work with my colleague, Mr. Wahlberg, on this. H.R. 4468, the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act, introduced by our full committee and sponsored by Mr. Wahlberg, is important. It's interesting that we found ourselves here, that we actually have to, once again, push back on the overreach, but we have to do it because consumer choice is going to demand it. And this legislation recognizes the importance of consumer choice in maintaining availability for the types of reliable and affordable vehicles that Americans want. As I said recently during a subcommittee hearing, we are facing an all-out assault from the EPA with rule after rule and weaponization after weaponization on liquid fuels and on primary sources of energy. These actions violate common sense. They ignore practical realities, like how much electricity will we need to make this plan work? In fact, I asked multiple senior leaders and the administrator at EPA and the Department of Energy secretary how much electricity we're going to need or currently use and how much we would need in addition to what we currently use, and nobody knows. Not a single person has been able to answer that question that's set right here in this committee. They're only concerned with imposing a mandate on how Americans live their daily lives. And the fact is that these rules will decrease our quality of life, they will jeopardize the most vulnerable in our populations, and they risk our national security by making us more dependent on nefarious actors. This must end. The CARS Act places a critical stop sign on this path to prevent a policy that makes sense for a few at the expense of the many. First, it prohibits the EPA from finalizing, implementing, or enforcing its proposal for light and medium-duty vehicles. Additionally, 4468 acknowledges that the EPA has abused its authority and did not seriously consider the impacts of its rule or if automakers can even comply. The association representing the manufacturers, which produce 97% of new cars sold in the U.S., recently announced the EPA's proposed rule is neither reasonable nor achievable in the rule's 10-year time frame. And the group listed 10 specific reasons why this rule was designed to fail, including an overly optimistic assumption about the pace and scale of EV and battery manufacturing and the technology to complement them. Additionally, the listed reasons explicitly called out that access to mined and refined critical minerals is essential and dependent on maintaining good trade relationships with China, Russia, and others who mine and refine them. This committee here, by the way, has talked about combating the nefarious actions of the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. So why would we want to embolden them and become more dependent on them? That's what this rule would do. That's why we have the CARS Act. And for good measure, there's also the lack of charging infrastructure for people who live in apartments, for those in rural and remote areas, just like my district. As if not extreme enough, the proposed rule contains unprecedented stringency in pace of growth for EVs. The rule assumes that EVs alone will make up 60% of the new vehicle sales in 2030 and 67% of new vehicle sales just 2 years later, a schedule that dwarfs President Biden's initial and ambitious 2030 target of 50%. Not only does the CARS Act send the EPA back to the drawing board, but it also amends EPA's regulatory authority to prevent us from being right back here again. Section 3 of the CARS Act prevents EPA from mandating a specific technology or issuing regulations that limit the availability of a particular vehicle engine. EPA's job is to identify emissions that danger health or welfare, not socially engineer and pick favorites in the cars that Americans must buy. If EPA intends to only set emission standards that are economically and technically feasible, this provision shouldn't be a problem. However, if EPA overreaches and decides to ratchet up greenhouse gas and criteria pollution standards to create a de facto technology or engine mandate, this bill will prevent it. H.R. 4468 is a worthy companion to the California waiver bill we are also considering. And by stunting efforts to discriminate against consumer choice and limit the mobility and freedom of Americans, it ensures and prioritizes ensuring the availability, affordability, and reliability of the vehicles and fuels that American consumers want and need for their lives. I urge everyone to use common sense and vote for this bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Do other members wish to speak on the bill? Ms. Schakowsky. Recognized.